Ahoy, everyone. Welcome to today's lecture. Today, we're going to be looking at the age of exploration or the age of conquest. We're going to be looking and talking about how Europe becomes this dominant force around the globe, how we start to see the beginnings of European dominance and the beginnings of a truly global history. We're going to be looking at three distinct areas that were influenced and conquered by Europe. We're going to be looking at Africa. We're going to be looking at the Americas. We're going to be looking at Southeast Asia. We'll begin with Southeast Asia, and we'll look and see how the spice trade there leads to further exploration to the Americas and how that ties into the African slave trade. Um, we're going to be dealing with a lot of ideas here that can be heavy, that can be pretty hard to deal with, but we're going to try to go through this in an even keel and even handed manner. So, without any further ado, let's get going. So we'll go ahead and get started here looking at the overall picture of European voyages in the 15th and 16th centuries. And as you can see here, it was the Portuguese that really get off to a start at the very beginning with their exploration starting in the 1430s, rounding around the Cape of Africa, and eventually making it to the East Indies. And then pretty quickly they are joined by the Spanish and then later on the British and the Dutch. So you're looking at this large scale movement of ships, goods, people throughout the world starting in the 1430s. And the reason this happens is threefold. Number one, you have the advancements and the increase in capital in Europe thanks to the Renaissance. And number two, you have uh, the wish to gain resources and gain souls thanks to the Reformation, and hand in hand with that, the political movement of the new monarchies. And then number three, you have the closing up of the Middle East, and as we'll Middle East and India, and as we'll look at next week, the closing up of China and Japan as well. So without most of the major forces in the East as a threat of any kind, the European forces are able to look towards the east and then later look towards the west. So this is the overall picture, as I said, and now we're going to be looking at this first part, the exploration here into Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is the reason why this whole thing happens. Trying to get to Southeast Asia and the goods in Southeast Asia is the ultimate goal for Europeans. This is the mother lode. This is what they want to get. And so we need to first look at it, what is so unique about Southeast Asia, and what exactly uh, the islands there provide for European traders, and exactly what they were like before European trade started. So, as I said, we're going to go ahead and start with Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia geographically is pretty much split into two different areas. You have maritime Southeast Asia, which includes the Philippines, East Malaysia, East Timor, Indonesia, Brunei, and Singapore. And then you also have mainland Southeast Asia, or Indochina, which is Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Burma, Thailand, West Malaysia, and Vietnam. So basically, you have maritime, which is basically means it's at sea, and then mainland Southeast Asia, or as it was known then, known for centuries, Indochina. And the reason it was known as Indochina is because it was right in between India and China, hence Indochina. Historically, this has been a very multicultural um, land. It's a vast collection of islands, and each of these islands has uh, um, developed independently of one another. So you have a huge swath of cultures that has different degrees of exploration. You have some islands that are as big as some as U.S. states, and then you have some islands that are um, basically the size of a small house. They're just these different islands throughout, and so with all these hundreds of islands that make up the entirety of maritime Southeast Asia, you have a great deal um, of diversity in culture. Historically, there's been very little interaction with Europe. You have this um, understanding that Europeans exist because Indonesia is actually trading with China, trading with India. Later, it's trading with Muslim empires. So goods from the goods from a Southeast Asia are making it to Europe, are making it to the Mediterranean, and then further than that for centuries because there is a trade network. Remember that the trade networks that the Mongols used that delivered the plague have been there for centuries. So it's uh, it's not an uncommon occurrence to find goods from Southeast Asia in Europe. It's just it just becomes more and more likely as trade begins to pump up into the 16th and 17th centuries. Um, the lands of Southeast Asia have um, been pretty good at repelling invasions. The Mongols made it to the Philippines and marched into or were sailing into Indonesia, but they never actually made it through because they were actually hit by one of the worst tropical storms to hit go through there. In the 15th century, and so the Mongols never really were able to get a hold of there. So they were able to sort of resist that mass conquest by the Mongols, and the Mongols sort of left them alone after that. And they had in Southeast Asia after the Mongols left, you did see the beginnings of trade with the Islamic empires, and a lot of the people in Indonesia accepted Islam through commercial interests and through religious interests. Just like in India, you had a Buddhist or Hindu religion that basically said that you had to suffer in order to really get anywhere in the next life. And this was a thing that was going to repeat over and over and over again. But with the coming of Islam, with coming of a much more much more straightforward religion, you would suffer in this life and then you would reap a reward immediately. It wasn't going to be this cycle of death and reincarnation. A lot of people really decided to accept this new religion, and a lot of people accepted it because Muslim empires would much more favorably with people that were Muslim themselves. So a lot of people converted to Islam due to commercial interest, due to wanting to make the most amount of money that they could. Uh, the state and society in Southeast Asia is as diverse as the people and the cultures. You have a lot of simple settlements. Pre-colonial Southeast Asia has um, a lot of going back to the Stone Age settlements that there where people lived simply. You had these cultures where people would live basically would create empires out of caves, but then you also had these giant maritime empires that lasted for hundreds of years. And so you have you can't really put Southeast Asia into one into a simple descriptor. You have to say that it was a very diverse area. You had people living in huts, and then you had people living in giant cities that rival anything that we have created up to this day. And because you had such diversity of cultures, diversity of people, diversity of food, clothing, etc., it was a very it was an empire that was sustained a lot by trade. Trade was very important for maritime Southeast Asia. The goods that you could find on one island wouldn't necessarily survive on another island, or weren't made in another island. So trade was very important to sort of not only sustain life, but also to sustain these empires, to move money around, to move the goods around, to move people around in order to make it a much a much more connected area. When it comes to religion and kingship, you had Buddhism and Islam well established. You had um, Buddhism coming from India and moving into Southeast Asia, and pretty much setting up shop throughout the islands. Islam, as I said, came in the 13th and 14th centuries, and was accepted by many people. And then you still had some islands that had a lot of Hindu influence. Many of the islands still practiced Hinduism, even though it was a religion that was sort of on the decline in the islands, and actually, as it declined in the islands, it actually grew in India and in the mainland. But you had Buddhism, Islam, and Hinduism as these established religions. So whenever the Christian missionaries would come, they would find that these weren't a pagan people. These weren't a non-religious people or someone with tribal religions. Developed hierarchical religions had been there for hundreds of years. And so in Southeast Asia, you basically have Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. You have the coming of Christianity, and you also have these political systems that are evolving into four main types throughout. You have Buddhist kings, so you have these empires where Buddhism is a state government, where Buddhism is a government that is controlled by Buddhism is a religion that is controlled by the government. So it becomes much more formalized than Buddhism is normally thought at. You have empires of kings and queens in maritime Southeast Asia, especially around Java, where it didn't matter if you were male or female. The firstborn child of a king would be, or queen, would be the heir. So there was a line that could go through women as well as men. You also had actually Islamic sultans, especially in Malaysia. You had kings that would, or excuse me, sultans that would rule over large maritime empires, and would facilitate trade with Islamic empires. And then you also had emperors in Vietnam that basically emulated China. Chinese government and Chinese culture moved into the what was known by Europeans as Indochina. It moved into the areas of Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam in the first millennia AD, and it took hold. And a lot of the emperors of Vietnam, of Cambodia, Laos, they emulated Chinese government and tried to present themselves as close to this Confucianist hierarchical government as they could. So, economically, you have Southeast Asia society based almost entirely on agriculture. The climate there is fantastic for growing crops, and so agriculture was one of the most important ways of life for the people in Southeast Asia. And since you live on an island, you don't often, as I said earlier, you don't often have some of the things that you might want, and so trade. Um, Regional interregional trade expands throughout Southeast Asia, and basically spices and other products are what's the most important thing. You see here the famed Spice Islands, where most of these spices originated from, things that we take for granted to this day. Um, and so as Southeast Asia grows, as empires grow, and as China, India, and Muslim empires begin to take more notice of Southeast Asia, you have Asian spice trade actually growing. You have a society that has a higher living standard than other places in Asia, and relative prosperity, especially, as I said earlier, the Mongols never made a real big invasion push into Southeast Asia, and so unlike China, which suffered under the rule of the Mongols, Southeast Asia continues to prosper and continues to grow. Um, Social institutions were fairly homogenous among the different islands. Within the different islands, you would have different. Uh, the different islands themselves were very diverse, but within the islands themselves, you had a pretty homogenous cultures within that allowed people to later come in and kind of study the islands a bit better and understand the people of Southeast Asia much better. And then in the early 1500s, you have a new player uh, in Southeast Asia, and that is the Europeans. Overland routes were usually tried to avoid because of the uh, because the overland routes were closed. As you can see here, overland routes would lead them through Muslim empires and lead them into China if they wanted to get into Southeast Asia. And then going through the sea routes, um, you had Indian, Muslim, Asian naval powers going throughout the Indian Ocean, the South China Sea, um, and even the South Atlantic. You would have boats going through there, and so the Europeans basically had tried to avoid the area for as long as possible, but thanks to the uh, uh, thanks to the advancements by the Renaissance, they began to look at reaching Asia by sea. And part of this was using Portolani, which we'll discuss more in class. These were detailed charts that were drawn up by navigators and mathematicians um, that basically mapped out coastlines and mapped out any sort of land uh, monuments that you could really navigate by either throughout the day. You also had better ships, caravels, ships that were mobile enough to sail against the wind and engage in naval warfare. And they were large enough to carry substantial goods, but they were, pretty mobile, pretty fast and sleek, but yet they could carry a lot of goods, which is what you wanted. And then, of course, you have things like the compass and the astrolabe, being able to navigate by the stars and by celestial bodies, so you can actually at night sail through and kind of know where you're headed and what your bearing is, and really make it through uh, uncharted waters, especially. So the very first European force that made it towards Southeast Asia was Portugal, under the King John II and Manuel the first. We have this encouragement and funding of exploration. And this encouragement and exploration leads to Bartolomeo Diaz rounding the Cape of Good Hope in 1487 and beginning to set up uh, fortifications around the eastern coast of Africa shortly after that. After that, you have Vasco da Gama rounding the Cape and stopping at ports along the coast of East Africa. So, about 1497, Vasco da Gama is going to make it around the Cape. Um, and he's going to stop at ports along the way and begin to set up some more fortifications. And then you're going to have them make it to India in 1498 and then come back, get a little lost along the way, and then make it into back to Portugal. So this was all in the search for the source of spices, and eventually the Portuguese are going to take Malacca here in Malaysia. That will basically get them the control of the spice trade. And the reason the Portuguese were able to succeed was mainly because of their guns and the strength of their naval forces. And these naval forces were mostly led by Alfonso de Albuquerque. Alfonso de Albuquerque had his grew and moved through the military ranks. Uh, with the battles against the Ottomans. He was very anti-Muslim and very much against Muslim domination of trade. Through his years of fighting against the Ottomans and fighting against Muslim forces, he became very much radicalized and was a a true believer in thinking that the Catholic forces needed to get rid of Muslim forces. And as he begins to move out and conquer, he's actually made the governor of Portuguese India. And he sought to expand the empire, and he goes out and captures Goa and Malacca, and he explores lands from Malacca, makes it all the way into the Arabian Peninsula, and even takes forces here at the Strait of Hormuz in the Gulf of Oman, basically taking parts of the getting a foothold on what is today modern day Iran. This would have been the parts of the Safavid dynasty at that time. And he continued to search for trade and in conquest opportunities. And one of the things that happens, though, is that he makes a lot of political enemies during this time. Alfonso de Albuquerque is a very well respected individual by his men, and this gives a lot of the people back home some pause, especially as he's gaining more and more power from Portuguese India. He's expanding out into Goa and Malacca, and from Malacca, he's exploring even more, gaining more and more land for Portugal. But a lot of the people think that he's getting land for himself, and he makes a lot of political enemies, and he is going to die at sea in 1515. People believe that he was assassinated. People believe that he was was a victim of political intrigue. And after he dies, there's no one really left to take up his control. His family is basically. Um, uh, they have their lands in Southeast Asia taken away and in India taken away. And so there's no one that can step into his forces. And pretty soon, Portuguese power begins to fade in Southeast Asia, and you have new rivals to Portugal coming up. The first of those being the Spanish. In 1492, of course, the famous voyage of Christopher Columbus happens, and you have the opening up of Western trade. And then in 1519, you have Ferdinand Magellan sailing around on the tip of South America and making it around the world via the Cape of Good Hope. And we'll discuss more about Magellan in class, but needless to say, he doesn't make it all the way through. Um, you have the Spanish eventually going to defeat the Portuguese and take over the Philippines and make the Philippines a major trade base in the Pacific Ocean, starting about 1521. So the Philippines become the place where Spain has their seat of power in Southeast Asia. And outside of the Spanish, you have also the English and Dutch as new rivals. The English and Dutch get a late start um, because of continued warfare, especially with the both English and Dutch splitting away from the Catholic Church. So you have them dealing with the Reformation. But really, by 1591 is the first English expedition to the Indies. And this is where you have the East India Company founded. And we'll go into greater detail about the East India Company in class, but it is a chartered company. It is a company that basically has a contract with the government. Is a private company, but it has a contract with the government, and the East India Company makes it through the Indian Ocean and begins to set up in India itself. In 1602, you have the Dutch East India Company established, and basically by 1641, they have themselves seized Malacca from the Portuguese. You have uh, Portugal no longer under the rule of Portugal no longer having control of the East Indies, and they basically the East Indies are become known as the Dutch East Indies from here into the 19th century. So this is where we're going to leave here. We're going to get discuss more in depth about about the different power players and their reasons for exploration and why they become so important, the English, Dutch, Spanish, etc., throughout class. That'll be our main focus class. So this first part will end here, and then we'll move to the um, conquest of the Americas.